Easily one of the best episodes of Shadow House to date. Episode 11 of the second season really does remind me of how much I love this writer. This writer is so good at crafting things together, and there's these very minute details that manage to wrap itself back into the story itself. I mean, one little prime example is having Edward take note that Barbara called him Edward and not Ed, and so thus she knows the secret about the fusing. It's like these little details that I love how they're kind of interweave with everything. It's just and just kind of the whole relationship between Mary Rose and Barbara, which was so good. Oh, I feel so bad for Barbara at this point. They have really made Barbara's story with everybody around her into one of the most tragic stories that you can really get. Just the idea of her feeling as if she's been abandoned, the truth that was kept away from her, her believing that everybody abandoned her, but in fact they're all just basically either being tormented by the truth or lost, honestly. And that's, jeez. During this episode, I was really honestly believing that they were going to get to this point where somehow Mary Rose learned that Christopher had failed the fusing. I wasn't expecting it to be Anthony comes back and says, yeah, he just basically learned the truth and ended himself. That way we wouldn't fuse. Thus meaning that Anthony at this point is probably a veiled doll somewhere. Oh, there's so much in my head right now. I cannot make heads or tails of what to really discuss first, but I guess we should go through the episode as a whole. It was cool to have the episode open up with Mary Rose noting the idea that for once, the house has acknowledged them as equals. For once, they're both in the same rooms and they're both wearing the same clothes. This is the first point they've ever noticed that her and her human living doll, they're being treated equals. It's really all they've been asking for. This is where we cut to Kate and she's received a letter. I totally thought this was going to be an invitation. I'm like, what? the moment that Emilko had that letter, I'm like, wait, is this a grandfather invitation? Like, they're just going straight for the thrones, like out of nowhere. Like, Mary Rose failed, so we're going to go straight for this. Because I really did think after the last episode, one of my other theories was that Edward was still going to go through with trying to fuse Mary Rose. Because she still had potential, and that he was going to risk bringing her into the grandfather's wing as a rebel, just so that he didn't show that he lost twice in a row. But no, the invitation was Barbara. She was letting her know that since she's a interested party in the whole situation, that she's going to be there present to be witness to when they move Mary Rose to grandfather's wing. I got really frustrated because they... Kate notes a Starbearer's medal, and I was like, oh, wow. Okay, so we're just going to have Barbara basically call her a Starbearer at this point. Like, hey, here you go. Here's your Starbearer status. No, it was all a complete fake out. She's like, don't even worry about that. Move on. We cut to the passageway going to grandfather's wing, and it's when we get pretty much the full backstory. Whew. And that was we've been basically teasing this backstory for... 11 episodes now? And we finally get it all the context, every bit of it, all from, at first, Barbara's perspective, but then eventually Mary Rose's perspective. From Barbara's perspective, yes, it shows how Christopher was extremely popular. Eventually, he brought Mary Rose and Barbara under his wing. He seen potential in them. He wanted to change the entire way that they do the children wing. And it was this idea of instilling lessons upon the children rather than where, like, Edward, for example, coming into the picture, he's like, just focus on yourself. Like, that's all that grandfather wants, is for yourself to shine. That's what gets you invited. Why bother with the rest of the stuff? And he's like, no, look, he actually flatters Edwards to get him to join the group, but it's basically this idea of, yeah, this will all eventually be a benefit to grandfather. Us teaching these children what they do. So the Starbearer's status basically just became this idea that they were all teachers, and everybody loved them. So that was all great. And even Barbara herself looked up to Christopher. They had some point where Barbara was asking if Mary Rose was into him or not, and she's like, no, it's not like that for me. Isn't it you, Barbara, that likes him? She's like, no, I just admire him. It was so cute. Gosh, like, Barbie was so Emilko. Barbie was so Emilko. Like, you know, they're doing all this stuff, and they see how good Barbie is at running around, so they make her, like, the physical instructor, and so she's running around, and she just, like, she looked like a ray of sunshine. Like, she looked like Emilko. But yeah, pretty much everything was the birth at this point. Like, they even had the research group was made from this point. Everything they do now was created by the systems that Christopher was doing, though we know exactly who was behind it later on. But again, eventually Christopher does get the invitation, and that's when Barbara says that's when it all fell apart. We were thinking, okay, we're going to take on all this role, but then suddenly Mary Rose wasn't coming out of her room. She was devastated. Everybody was leaving her, and that was the point where she just exploded, and that harmed her living doll. It harmed Barbie. That's when the current warden brings her into his place and says, look, Christopher has a lot of expectations for you, but you will never be an adult because your face is damaged. And she's like, well, why are you talking to me like that? You're a living doll. And he's like, no. And he reveals that, yes, he is an adult. He is somebody that is fused between each other. She learned about the fusing at this point, and that, yes, since Barbie's damaged, she can't be an adult. But rather than dispose of her, he does say, since Christopher has high expectations for you, you're going to take over for him. And you're going to keep order in the children wing. And eventually, when your living doll heals, you will become an adult. So there's a lot of potential in her. Obviously, she has a large amount of soot. And that sadly was the beginning of Barbara just becoming so closed off. Everything's about order. It's all about instruction, nothing else. But yeah, that's when we get the full story of Mary Rose, which I should have seen. This was a complete flag. You get a full life story of a character, they're gone. But no, Mary Rose, from the point that she was a morph, she felt like she had an advantage to everybody else and so much choice, but in actuality, that was like the beginning of her anguish. Eventually, everything happened with Christopher bringing everybody together, but the key thing here was the reveal about Anthony. Anthony, who was Christopher's living doll, was actually behind everything. Christopher got the credit because he was a shadow, but Anthony was the mastermind behind everything. He was the smart one. Even Christopher himself says, how can I manage to have somebody so smart as him behind me? And Anthony's still like, no, you're still my master. And the reason why he was so smart, the reason why Anthony was so smart is because, for one, he's a human and he's able to get all this knowledge and craft ideas, but because Mary Rose discovered the secret about the coffee and the mind control. And she chose to tell Anthony. So when Anthony stopped taking the coffee, his mind was cleared and he can think better, and thus he crafted all these crazy ideas. Mary Rose initially did it with Rosemary because she wanted somebody to laugh at her jokes. And so she did additionally with Anthony to kind of add to that. But they chose it just to be them, not Barbara. Never get Barbara involved because they felt like the weight of the secret itself would be too much of a burden upon her. So that's why Barbara was always out of the picture and didn't know any of this stuff was happening. So yes, eventually when Christopher received his invitation, that's when Anthony realized the importance of the coffee, because that was the only way that they would ever accept the fusion. Thus kind of indicating to me they learned about the fusion and what it does prior to actually doing it. Because Christopher gained the knowledge of what would happen to Anthony, and he chose to take his own life, which is, again, I wasn't expecting. I completely expected that it was going to be a case that they just failed the fusion, but no, it was in fact that Christopher didn't want to have it done. And Anthony would now, we would assume at this point, become a veiled doll. And this was the beginning of everything. This was the moment where Barbara was seeking out to Mary Rose to tell her to help her, and Mary Rose could not confront Barbara. She knew the truth, and she couldn't tell Barbara what happened to Christopher, who she obviously loved. But additionally, all the other secrets, what they were seeking out, the whole idea that what Christopher had for their group was to become adults. And now they just realized everything they've been building up for is a lie. And it's all to the death of their living dolls. Which, yes, to Mary Rose is obviously one of the gravest things. She loves Rosemary. And he assumed that Christopher loved Anthony as well. But yeah, really crazy backstory. And like I said, it kind of ties everything together. And this is one of those moments, I had the same problem with the first season. Like the moment we had the reveal of the humans being the living dolls and all this information about what Kate wants to do and going forward, it's like, what else do you have to reveal? And it's like, this is that point where it's like, oh yeah, this writer has so much more to get into. And we haven't even touched Grandfather's Wing. There's going to be so much more crap in there, I'm sure. But yeah, this goes back to the present time, which we hand her over. Barbara says something to Edward to the effect of, this delay was due to your false information. Stop swaying the Star Bearers to your own whims. They part ways, and that's when Edward starts mentioning the idea that, oh, it looks like you weren't affected by me being called Edward, so you must have the real information. So that's all right, though. We'll weed out whoever's giving that information out about the fusing. Yes, that's when Mary Rose gives her final stand. She releases all this soot that was underneath the passageway. It turns into a big, huge phantom, which, yes, in this episode, we've completely confirmed the idea that, yes, Mary Rose is the origins of the phantoms. The phantoms were created from essentially the stories that Christopher was telling, which I think that was a question that I had in a previous episode. So they just basically finally fully confirmed that yes, she's creating them. Which I brought up in the episode with the research group, is they were kind of mentioning the idea that they just don't come to be. So thus, the cloaked figure had to create them. But yeah, this is where we find out that, yes, adults are quite strong, which we kind of assume. But at least specifically, Edward mentions the idea that when you fuse, it's not just you fusing to one thing. Your soot powers themselves become amplified. And so they're much stronger. Adults are much stronger than your typical children. He used this echo thing that completely debilitates them. And then, yes, Yeah, Mary Rose and Rosemary decided to take the plunge. Rather than be infused, they decided to leap to their fate. Now, I say fate because there's still a small side of me that hopes, hopes all those little soot critters that just kind of got pushed out of the window. There was a scene in Hear me out. Hear me out. And again, source material people, please don't confirm nor deny. Hear me out. At the beginning of the episode, they went out of their way to show Emilico lose her footing and fall over. And guess what broke her fall? Soot. It went out of its way to show Emilico about to hit the floor, and Kate softened her blow with a little pillow of soot. And I seen all these little critters falling out the side of the bridge. So I still have hope that all those little critters formed into a nice cushion airbag that they'll fall onto and we won't lose them. But I don't know. It seems like they're willing to push this idea that Mary Rose and Rosemary are sort of a tragedy. They're sort of the Romeo and Juliet. I don't know. I think that I just don't want to listen. That was sad. So essentially, we lost three named characters in this episode, and we've never really lost that many. Like this entire series, technically, all we've really lost are like no-name characters, like the ones that were in the fusion tank. I mean, technically, even with Shirley and Rum, they're not technically gone. Rum is a veiled doll, and Shirley is back to being a morph. So I don't know. I'm gonna hold hope that Mary Rose and Rosemary aren't gone, but there's a good chance they are. It's a long fall. It's a really long fall. But no, like I said at the very beginning, I think this entire episode just broke my heart for Barbara. Yes, I'm sad to see Mary Rose and Rosemary gone. And yes, it's kind of tragic to learn about Christopher and Anthony. But the key thing here, I think, is just everything that's around Barbara that she has no idea about, which has me desperate, so desperate, that we get some sort of revelation to Barbara herself, that she learns the truth at this point. I mean, she has the knowledge of fusion, but she never mentioned anything about Christopher. Now, granted, I don't think she had any relationship to Anthony, so I don't think she cares. I think her relation was to Christopher specifically. That's why it kind of went out of its way to show Christopher running with Barbara separate. She never had a relationship with Anthony, so I don't think that she cares about losing Anthony. She doesn't want to lose Christopher. And even at the point where she's giving over to Edward, she's mad because Christopher's not there. Why isn't Christopher the warden? You know, it's so funny because right there I was like, girl, he failed the fusion. I was for sure at that point that he failed the fusion and then he died. Again, I did not think that it was going to be a case where he just ended his own life. He had a lot of respect for Anthony, I think. Anthony was the reason why he was successful. He's better than me. Why would I take over his life and remove him from existence? So with that knowledge, all she cares about right now is getting to become an adult and get to Christopher. And I think I guess my revelation that I think is going to come from this is that I think her seeing Rosemary and Mary Rose jump to their death, she's going to suddenly realize that bond they have. I don't know. It's crazy. I really do hope that we have some sort of revelation. And I felt that early on. I felt like there's going to be a point in this season that we're going to have Barbara become an ally of Kate. She's the mean one that actually has a heart underneath there somewhere. Anyways, I've been talking way too long about this episode. There's just so much to talk about in this episode. I had so much to talk about. Only one more episode. So I hope you guys will join me next week for the finale of the series. I thank you guys for watching this video. If you like this video, make sure to hit that like button down below. Comment, let me know what you thought. Again, spoilers for this source material. No. Additionally, if you've not already and you're new to this channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you get all my content. I do news, reviews, first impressions. If it's anime, it's pretty much here. Additionally, if you want to support the channel more and you like what you're seeing here, I would greatly appreciate if you consider supporting us on Patreon, our tips link, or super thanks button down below. Anything you can give is greatly appreciated, and y'all take care.